Welcome to our third and final presentation on the visualization of HACCP using barrier risk management. I'm here with Alistair Cohen from CG Risk. My name's Andrew Collins from Camden BRI. In the previous sessions, we actually looked at the BowTie and how it's actually structured with their 8 component parts that Alistair walked you through. And I shared with you how that may look in a food situation. But there's a lot more that we can use this tool for, because when we think about supply chain, we can actually look at, what are the bow ties at any point in time, whether that's from our supply chain in terms of farmers, transport, actual manufacturers, transport, retailers, consumers, and you can sort of see that point of line. So to sort of illustrate that, and how do we all link these two together? Well, it's very interesting that when we actually look at the software program, it gives us this ability to actually group bow ties together. So here we've looked at them being one on the farm, manufacturer, sort of looking at it from a retailer, supermarket, and then obviously from a consumer perspective. Because when we actually look at the farm, we can see about the contamination of food, that may come from, the threats on the farm, but leading to the consequences. And that then has a link to not only from the farm, but to actually the manufacturing. So they can see that they've actually got contamination from the food coming from the farm right up at the top. But then as the manufacturer, they're going to be supplying it to the retailers. So that they're actually looking what happens beyond. These are all the threats and these are all the consequences as well. And then when we actually look at the retailer, they're receiving food that is supposed to be safe to eat, but they're also going to be selling it. And so there is still a point in the supply chain and that sort of effective traceability. Because finally, we will have the consumer. That's you, me, our friends, our family, and also other people. As that if we are getting contaminated products, and maybe even looking at the food packaging as well, because if that's contaminated, the consequences are that we could potentially be ill, lose time, unable to work, lost time incident type of scenario. But one of the beauty about the software is that we're able to chain that all together. And we can highlight where there is a continual link from hazards going all the way through the supply chain. But then in this example, we've highlighted something that actually goes through from the packaging. There's nothing to stop it. There's nothing to reduce it or eliminate it. And actually it goes straight to the consumer. And there is sort of, obviously, when you look at the retailer, the reputational damage. This is obviously just for an example. So this is something that we start to have a much better picture. We start to realize where our threats may come from. They may not always come from our immediate supplier or within the manufacturing process. And you can see this loop because it talks about the recontamination or the additional contamination that may happen within the manufacturing environment as well. And, this really is all, the farm to fork, the plow to plate, the, whatever acronym, whatever terminology people want to use, is that we really need to understand the whole of that and to be able to model it effectively. But not only that, is that we can actually look at it from a zoom level. And when we talk about the zoom level, Alistair, I mean, we can look at it at well, depends on who we are presenting it to in many respects.
Yeah, so I tend to start in the middle at the process level. So this would be looking at an individual process that we're trying to understand and ensure that we've got good control over. But if I've got a particular step of that process, I could do a more detailed, more nuanced bow tie for that bit. So the lower down this chain I go, the more bow ties I will produce. So I would kind of save those for critical activities. But one of the other things we alluded to in the previous video was the fact that I can blend my nature of risk. So I can cover food safety, HSE, business risk, that loss of reputation that you've highlighted previously. And so I can pull up from this. I can take data from my detailed bow ties and just bake it in. Some of those could be threats to the business. So if I'm running multiple processes on one site, I could group those to see the threats that come from all 9 processes at a business level and how that might impact the business risks. But at an individual level, that gives the manager of a particular process line the power to run their process line and understand the risks that they're responsible for, and then maybe go down to some of the key steps and give the individuals involved with those the detail that they need to understand that they're working this effectively. So it's a very powerful tool, as you say, from a top to bottom, but also a chaining through the end-to-end process.
Yeah, I mean, and quite often we might be looking at specific hazards, specific microorganisms, or specific chemical hazards such as allergens, at that lower level, what you call the work bow ties here. But I also think, and I think you alluded to it, and conversations that I've had with you and obviously some of your other colleagues and partners, is that it's about this language thing as well. Because I think really in terms of how you actually phrase, and how you present the information in the bow tie, you can pull out the, as it were, the specific, the unique language, but also then talk to each other in a very common language. So, it can be used not only for food, it can be used for process safety in terms of from a health and safety perspective, but also from dare I say, sort of like an occupational health.
And business risk, the
Yeah.
economic risks of the business. Yeah, it's a very powerful thing there. And I think the language side of it, you do have to think about the words and the phraseology, because you have a common palette within the tool. But I think that the key driver is this visual thing, and that breaks down some of that language. People see that the engineering aspects of the site contribute to the business risks, the output of the product contributes to the business risk, and the engineering protects the business risk. It brings it all together, and it gives you the previous diagram with the flow of understanding how we can reinforce this particular hazard by doing things. That drives that understanding and that realization that these things are quite critical to my business operation. These things are quite critical to this particular process. Really helps drive that detail into people with that commonality of language, but also the simplification, the use of graphics, the images that you use.
And so, in many respects, in terms of like you're talking about adding the detail, we could actually look at a barrier. And I think then we can actually underpin the activities or the procedures that allow that barrier to function and, function effectively. But then we also, as you already alluded to about some of these escalation factors or degradation factors, we've also got to think about, whilst there are these escalation factors that could compromise the effectiveness of the barrier, that we can highlight, we've got to maintain that functionality. And we start to add in a bit of depth of, we talk about pictures, it's about depth of color, it's sometimes about shading, and those may be very subtle things, and it's about using information that we already have.
I was about to say exactly that. Is people will look at this and think, oh, it's another thing that we have to do. Well, the reality is you already understand the barriers that you have in place. You've probably got them documented. They're just in folders. You've got 2 inches of paperwork to get through. This is a way of giving you a lens into your management systems, the processes, the steps that you do. And as you say, color them in and highlight the criticality and the importance of certain steps. Or importantly, highlight where steps are missing, or you start to realize those steps don't deliver the functions that you want. So it provides clarity, it provides focus. And yes, it is a slight additional task, but it's using the data that you have. It's building on the knowledge that you've already started with, but making it easy to interpret.
And I think, it does require sometimes a way of thinking differently about some of these. So, just to sort of add a little bit of value to this in terms of trying to put sort of the lens on it, here we can actually talk about sort of labeling in terms of the allergens are not declared up on the label as being a threat. We've got packaging specs, so that makes that making sure the right information is on the packaging. And obviously there are the legal requirements in terms of what we need to do. And here we have just highlighted here, the activity of labeling. And within the software, it's about the responsibility, about that's being
I
defined.
was just going to add that is we haven't filled this in for the demo purposes, but one of the key things is to understand who's actually responsible for that. And within a business, it could be people in a different department who don't really have a concept of exactly why that's so important. And it could be people, third parties, and you could have contracted this work out. And again, they might not have the full context. So this helps give people that just little bit of extra reach around the problem and go, that's actually one of my top 10 jobs. I need to get that right every time.
And then, sort of just going back to the illustration again, for illustration purposes, we've highlighted here we've got a threat, but there's no barrier in that line, or we've got a consequence. Again, we've got no mitigation in that line. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of putting a layer, and I talk about shade. And, Alistair, you mentioned about sort of the effectiveness of some of these. And again, this is about you talk about the management system. It's that third element that we talked about, do we have information about how effective our controls are? And we can, in real time, we can tag that information to say, well, we've got the presence of undeclared allergens in the raw material, but we've got an effective approved supplier protocol. However, when we look at things like, the potential atomization of allergens, or say in terms of, not saying that if they become atoms, but in terms of that they may get distributed in terms of air, we think about scheduling, or we haven't got a very good we haven't zoned it off correctly because we've forgotten to sort of take the wall up to the ceiling. We then see that actually they may not be as effective as they should. And if we actually,
sorry, Andrew, the key thing here is that if you looked at a poorly performing schedule on its own, would you have linked it to the fact that the other barrier that sits alongside it, the other thing that you might rely on, is also poorly performing? So you might look at it from a raw data point of view and go, well, it's not as good as we'd like, but it's okay for now. Whereas this brings the context of those two things actually sit on the same threat line, and I need one of them at least to be green. So I've now got that business focus. I now need to go, well, which one can I fix today, or which one's the cheapest one to get up and running quicker? And it gives you that focus that you would have not had by just looking at the individual data points.
And also, when we sort of look at some other, barriers that actually may not be functioning at all as they should be, such as, just for illustration purposes, I've used about traceability, because we're not able to recall all the product from the marketplace in a timely fashion because our monitoring has not picked it up in time. But also, you can look at, barriers may sit both sides of the hazard, because we could make sure that we've got to put the right label on the right product and we've got to have the right information. But actually, the consequence of not having the right information means that we are not able to communicate to the consumer, who is in that at-risk category, what is actually in the product. So the labeling, is it going to be a mitigation? I know I've had many discussions about labels because people look at speed signs and they see that they're a speed target rather than the speed limit. I think what this actually does, it helps us to sort of focus upon it as a limit. It's something that's got to function to stop it from happening. And then, in many respects, so when we actually look at this, really, and going back to this previous slide, really, I mean, at this point, what we'd like to say, we've only given you a top level conversation here. I wouldn't even say that we've dipped our toe in the water, but we've just given you, this is a concept which I think has got a lot of value and can be used very effectively in the food industry. And, if you want more information, if you would like a much more detailed presentation, then we are more than happy to actually do so. And that, we can do that remotely depending upon, the current situation. So, please, if you've found this of interest, if there's something that you feel that is going to be of value to your business, if you feel it's going to strengthen and improve what you already have, then please drop me a line. You've got my email address. Give me a call. Obviously, you know, if you want to speak to Alistair more about who CGE Risk are, you know, by all means, give him a call or drop him an email. Thank you very much indeed for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you.